I think I lost you all. I hope that some of you are back. That's annoying. Let me know if you're back. Damien J redeemed a yeehaw. Thank you for your redemption, and I'm glad that you're back, Damien J. I lost everyone. Yeehaw! Thank you so much for that redemption. It's very nice to see you, Mr. Damien J. Hello to Mr. Damien J. only. His song was a comfort, a womb she could bundle in, but no meaning at all. Ros Hinkle's mandolin. She woke the next morning, the train briefly parked to take on supplies her friend had disembarked. From then on until Margaret reached her destination, the cold didn't manage the same penetration. If in 28 you had chanced by the water of Seattle's harbour, you might spy 3 daughters working alongside 2 sons and a mother, and Dad you would see something lovely and other. The father a raven-haired man, Japanese, the mother with hair like autumnal leaves, the children just western enough so's to pass, with tresses the colour of bright polished brass. The wife wraps your fish, gives you one of her smiles, but her eyes tell a journey of thousands of miles, and in the Midwest a babe, pulled from the loins, has a head full of curls shining like copper coins, and the midwife is twiggled to a child from years back, but there's been so many babies, by now she's lost track. Clifford. To pay for what crime, what malfeasance, what sin? Clifford's mother mused, picking her blouse from her skin. Malibu's breezy, Hollywood's shady, but Burbank he might as well have brought us to Hades. I could just yip when I think of the crime. It was moving me out here because of the climate. The fan in her hand, the scene's soul languid motion. I once heard it said that there was an ocean not terribly distant from where we sit here, but I suppose that was just a bum steer. Escaping me now are the details, specific, but could it be named something like the Pacific? Her voice was dramatic, befitting her role of a truth-telling wag, witty, gin dry and droll. She responded in thus that it surely beat weeping, and she couldn't help smiling with how out of keeping it was with the truth of her fate-handled cards. Her down-at-heel block with its sun-roasted yards, she found it amusing and helped pass the day to speak like a guest at a fancy soiree. She battled the hours without end with a heightened insolence, like whistling when truly one's frightened. With steely resolve she kept up this appearance. Her husband no more than a mild interference, the way one might greet less than optimal weather. His half-palsied body, as light as a feather, diminishing powers of speech, what a scream! Feeding and grooming hours each, such a dream. It might take all morning to just get him showered, and yet one might think she had married no coward. Such terribly juicy, just so bit of news, with witty urbane comme il faut apéreuse. Even though it was usually just she and her son, who thought 6 proved a rap audience of 1. Hello, Defiantly Not Pat. Hello to Defiantly Not Pat. Only. I lost the stream for a little while, but I just kept reading and I just assumed you guys would come back when you could. Glad to see you, Defiantly Not Pat. Very glad you're here. I hope that you're well. She sat on the porch with her 1,000-yard stare and spent each day parked in her old wicker chair, the yard a brown painting of motionless calm, the packed ochre dirt and the lone scraggy balm. No sway to its fronds, nor the messy dry grasses, immobile and baking in air like molasses. Nearby was the car, having one was a must, a 38 Packard, near silver with dust. Her husband had needed it when he was travelling, but that too was part of the wholesale unravelling of what had once been a not horrible life, but now here she was, neither widow nor wife, like flies trapped in amber, and 3 of them stuck like so many others dealt cards of rough luck. Clifford attempting to shake off her blues. You couldn't even see the book. Whoopsie. Sorry, guys. Clifford, attempting to shake off her blues, might draw her a hat or a new pair of shoes, a bonnet fantastic, bombastic and huge. He appended 3 veils and a tiny Mount Fuji. Pumps clasped with diamonds and a marabou trimming, and thick soles of glass house living goldfish swimming. Smiley Virus Redeemed, take a wet drink. You're looking dusty. That's a very good idea, Smiley. Thank you very much. I would love to. Thank you very much for your redemption, Smiley Virus. I appreciate it. Pumps clasped with diamonds and marabou trimming, and thick soles of glass housing living goldfish swimming. His mother surveyed his designs with a laugh. If I wore those both, I would be a giraffe. He lived for her laughter, and after that how she might rustle the fine hair that fell across his brow. You'd have scads more talent beyond any other kid I've ever seen, and I'm not just your mother. I'm a good judge of art. With her fingers she gravelled the armrest. I've seen things. Remember, I've travelled. Remember, she'd travelled as if he'd forget. Her life before him was the thing that beget his voracious desire and unquenchable fondness for all the world's beauty that lay just beyond. Their veranda enclosed in its old fly-flecked screen, Cliff sometimes felt like the one who had been. The Great War concluded a scant 2 years prior. They'd sailed to a Europe no longer on fire. Our trunks bore initials with golden embossing, a French Tudor book for the day of the crossing. And father tipped porters the whole silver dollars, and I had a wool coat with a beaver fur collar, the dresses a new one for each day at sea, not counting the outfits we'd change after tea. This next chapter is Mother. For each ensemble a different purse, Clifford had memorized chapter and verse. He was so profligate, headless, a rash. It's quite a feat now with no help from the crash. How easily parted our gold from that fool. By 26 Sally and I had to leave school. As with all else she would choose to be funny about how her father had squandered his money, and all of us crammed in that one narrow row house. If not for our wages there would have been no house. Last I heard, father was down on the Bowery. A whole mess of bother and woe was my dowry. Your grandfather Clifford could sure make a mess of a perfectly good situation. I digress. Fish knives and cake forks and gleaming tureens, surely your aunt and I ate like young queens. New Year's on board was all revel and roistering, crackers with prizes and champagne with oysters. Each knot from the shore she could feel adolescence depart in the wake, churning green phosphorescence. Churning in her was, if by duress, an appetite, bone deep, a need to transgress. The evenings were worse once the super bell rang, the darkness the wine well, her bloody fairies sang. A dark Turkish unsigned gave me my first kiss, and then she paused. Should I be telling you this? Might as well learn, she went on with a shrug. His tongue in my mouth was all slimy, fat slug. I remember I thought to myself, holy Jesus, this will not be worth it unless father sees us. Hello, Ross Cole, my friend. Hello to darling Ross Cole only. I've not seen you in ages. How are you? I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for coming by. Cull Obsidian, how is the moustache, Flossie? I hope it is soft and comfortable. If you ever want to borrow mine, I can lend it to you and post it. Thank you so much, Cull Obsidian. I think I'd really like that. Yes, please. Good, and you? I'm good, thank you. I'm so glad it's raining. So glad it's raining and that there might be a break in this horrible weather. But Apart from that, I think my stream has crashed twice tonight, but I've just kept reading, so I guess it's been alright. Colour Obsidian redeem, try and raise an eyebrow. Of course. Of course. I've warmed them up. Let's go. That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one. That's another really good one. That's another really good one. I think I've done well there. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Thank you. It comes in like waves, isn't it? Because last time I tried to do it was absolute dog shit. But that was better. This book art looks really cool. I haven't seen this before. Yeah, this is me trying to raise an eyebrow. I have come a very long way because I used to not be able to do it at all. I think I've done very well. Prepared to be amazed, but not really. So rude, Smyvi. She said, Lane. Thank you so much. That's so kind of you to cheer 300 bits. Beep boop. Thank you so much, she said, Lane. You're really kind. Thank you. Thank you so much. 7.5 out of 10. That's rough. 10 out of 10. Impressive eyebrow game. Thank you, Colour Obsidian. I can do it, but only on one eyebrow, my left one. I can only kind of do one. I wonder. God. No, it's a bit too hard to swap it. I'm not going to be able to do the other side ever. 10 out of 10 is a rock circa 1994. That's fair, Gimpy the Kid. But I do think I deserve a 10 out of 10 for my efforts. I've gone from 0 to this. And like, I'm really proud of the fact that I'm learning how to raise an eyebrow, which is something that I've wanted to do for a really long time. I'm proud of me. I have no eyebrows to do it with. I keep on offering to dye your eyebrows like I dye mine. I even bought dye that was closer to the colour of your hair, Chrissy, so that it wasn't so dark. Not as dark as mine. And you keep saying no. So you can't complain about not having any eyebrows and then not letting me dye your eyebrows. Do you use an Ethernet cable for your internet or Wi-Fi? Wi-Fi, I think that's why it keeps crashing. But our good friend Jen Clone might have come up with a solution, so we'll see whether that works. But yeah, Wi-Fi, that's why it's crashed so many times. Hey, I'm a harsh critic. You can't improve if anyone tells you you've mastered it. I can't improve unless everybody is really, really, really nice to me. If anybody's even a little bit mean to me, I'll just quit immediately. So, Jen Clone's here. Hello, Jen. Hello to Jen Clone only. Really nice to see you, Jen. I hope you're well. Thank you for coming by. I'm glad you're here. I heard you got new Cards Against Humanity cards. And she will appear. She did appear. We're all proud of you. Thank you, Colour Obsidian. Thank you, Colour Obsidian. Let's read. Oh. No, stop showing my... Just do that, shall we? Who keeps messaging me? Oh. His tongue in my mouth was a slimy fat slug. I remember I thought to myself, holy Jesus, this will not be worth it, and this will not be worth it unless Father sees us. With deepest conviction, she found me hilarious. Clifford stopped viewing the trip as vicarious, studying programs, the postcards, the scraps. He fingered the flyers and mangled the maps. An El Greco folio she'd kept from the Prado, a stub from the old oily Carter's thrilling Mikado. She'd tried a Soho-bought gilt ivory fan. He counted the two as a stop in Japan. Above all, the thing that had captured his heart and opened his world, the reproductions of art, Bernini and Rubens, Poussin and David, they filled Clifford with near physical need to render his best as he could. All he saw, the only desire Clifford had, was to draw, to master the methods of the artist commands, to translate a thing from the eye to the hands. There might be a hint in the dry introductions. He'd flip back between them and the reproductions. Clifford consumed them as if they were food. He studied how colour might render a mood, skin tone and placement, drapery and flowers, moonlight on lovers asleep beneath bowers, torments endured with the saint's skyward smile, nuance, technique, composition and style. You missed the best eyebrow raise ever. Toned foam power off so you'll miss it. Oh no, I can't, because I've got to keep it on in case I get my groceries delivered. Landscapes with dream-like blue hills in the distance, the Sabine's dramatic up-reaching resistance of strong Roman arms that were trying to rape her. His greasy young fingers had yellowed the paper. The jam smears and markings and smudges and rips, all left in the scrapbooks she's kept at her tips, souvenirs treasured like they were his own. He swore that he'd go there as well once he's grown. Make sure you say yes then if anyone offers, since there's not a sou in the family coffers. She gave up entirely the impulse to say, "It's lovely out, Cliffy, why don't you go play?" And play where exactly? The yard was an eyesore. They'd seen in a newsreel a famine in Mysore. Identical dirt turned in similar mud. A sacred cow chewing its sad, holy cud. Flies crawling over a child's thin, dry face. She heard Clifford whisper, "This is just like my place." He liked it indoors, where dark as a seance, hunched over his sketchbook with pencil and crayons. He sprawled on the carpet in front of the wireless. He filled up the pages. His output was tireless. Amethyst asters on brown blanks of peat, aloe with leaves thick and fleshy as meat, beryl-eyed lions with grey monkeys who so resembled the creatures of Londoner Rousseau. Succulents, paddles, and dew-heavy fronds, tourmaline fish swarm through indigo ponds. Ivies that twined with a grip near prehensile all sprang alive from the tip of Cliff's pencil. Inspired by his child's book of flora and fauna and broadcasts of Rex Bond, interpretive explorer. Inveterate explorer, my apologies. Oh, Rex, weakly captured, or worse, left for dead, in a faraway place that filled Clifford's head. Rex could escape from the driest of rotten spots, bloodthirsty tigers or Hottentots. Meeting his end in the desert, the drink, cessed flies, quicksand, or thrown in the clink, left on a newly carved iceberg, adrift, but lately the perils had made a slight shift. Fictional savages, strange voodoo mystics, supplanted by dangers far more realistic. Tried but could not muss the crease of his trousers, for boys just remember the fiercest blitz is no match against our American wits. Stay alert and stay wise to all foreign known knavery. Show grit and resolve and mimic the bravery of all our men on the land, air and sea who continue to fight so that we may be free. When a threat rears its head, don't shrink and don't cower, just rise to the challenge like amber wave flower. Take recipes meagre and renders them rich, if eager for tender cakes, mother should switch. And remember the dawn comes when things seem most bleak. Good night, boys and girls, and please tune in next week. There's little as scolding as juvenile adore, it's quickening as hatred or anger, but harder to phrase, especially since one might feign not to covet one's heart, one's desire, one's secret beloved. Since others might feel it was somehow unsuitable, so you become guarded, sphinx-like, inscrutable, but sleep, free of judgment, knits care-ravelled sleeve, in slumber without so much as by your leave. Was Clifford allowed certain muscles to flex and truly be all that he could to dear Rex? A Rex needing a rescue, who'd sent an alert to Clifford uniquely equipped to avert a numerous formless Rex-threatening disaster, conspiring to injure his muscular master. He'd find Rex bound up in some old empty warehouse and carry him home in the dream it was their house. He'd bathe him and generally solve the abuses by pressing his lip to incipient bruises, until the repletion near up to the hilt he would waken quite shaken and sweaty and guilty, to find that his mother was calling his name, so back to the world of his clandestine shame. I may well be shrewd, but I'm not shrewish, she'd titter, by which she meant not inevitably bitter. 12 years and counting, still able to joke, despite her sick husband quite corkscrewed with stroke. And truly she was shrewd at practical knowledge, and worked in the local community college, keeping the books a quite valuable service. The dean told her numbers had made him quite nervous, and thanks to her privileged employee's status, she put Cliff in life drawing totally gratis. In each Monday night for 3 hours she told him, it's serious, no joking, your classmates are old. And though you're 15, you will still be the best, just wait, they'll be bug-eyed, bedazzled, impressed, and soon you'll draw bodies just like as you see 'em. It's this class today and tomorrow, museum. But Cliffy, she said, yes, she really was shrewd, the models you draw you will draw in the nude. And paying close heed to her dear son's reflexes, she added, nude men and women, it is both sexes. And there it was, an almost invisible thing, like seeing a breeze or a hummingbird's wing. The mention of men had got straight to his heart, and her son gave an almost electrical start, which caused within her some inevitable invisible flower to bloom, because, dear ones, all knowledge is power. Of course she was right. Cliff drew circles around all the others, and what's more, he happily found his talent in his most pronounced characteristic. Not long hair or pansy or other sadistic abuse. Instead, he was now deemed the professor. And his youth made him safe. He was also confessor. Marie, whose red thermos contains scotch and water. Barbara, who hates that she hates her own daughter. Dan's sorrow masked by the face of a bon vivant. Clifford stayed silent like any good confidant. Grown-ups, it seemed, were quite blatantly uncurious. A silence and safety Cliff found quite luxurious. Their secrets would never expand to a chat. He would listen, was young, he could draw, and that was that. And as far for the drawing, he loved the deep rigour demanded of him. He attacked with new vigour. The honing of skill, lines were finer, less crude. It registered barely that subjects were nude. The occasional breast, due to space, time, and gravity, might give a brief shock, but there was no depravity, nor any great interest about what was there. He was frankly relieved for the chevron of hair, concealing some deeper and unwanted knowledge, until one day Paul, on the track team at college, posed and put Clifford through the sufferings of job the instant he untied and took off his robe. His limbs, like the David's, impossibly fine, and lacing just under like flesh-covered twine the veins that gave life to his ambulant heart, shunting blood from his sure-to-be beautiful heart. Crossed the shoulders and down to the backside's deep cleft, to his manhood that hung with imperious heft, to the ribs blue with shade, neath his chest's cantilever. Cliff was undone as if he'd caught a fever. His charcoal went wide in an archaic scroll. Clifford felt hot, cold, then started to fall. He heard someone laugh as though this was a game. Then he blacked out as everyone shouted his name. Infirmary couch with its cool oxblood naugahyde. Clifford felt boneless and battled and raw inside. A verdict passed down that could not be revoked. Something was loosened and felt formally choked. a process unstoppable once it began, like trying to put shaving cream back in its can. A vaguely elating but frightening bubble. He felt buoyant and free, and yet somehow in trouble. In excess of caution they summoned his mother and asked her, concerned, had there been any other such fevers of late, whether he had been sick. His head hit the floor like a cloth-covered brick. They told her that it had been Paul who had carried him. Cliff, dimly conscious, though they'd said married him, surveying his saviour, she said with a stealthy murmur that no one could hear, "He seems healthy." Clifford seemed fine, all were happy, relieved. He was no worse from wear, and the others believed that the culprit was likely the heat of the room, to which Clifford's mother responded with, The children's logic can be exquisitely structured. Mistake the aunts take Aunt Sally's visit. Each May, Clifford's mother took 2 weeks off work for her sister and niece who had come from New York. They'd go to their train, Cliff inspecting their berth, then back to the house for a fortnight of mirth. Albums to leaf through, plus meals to eat. After they'd sit on the porch, both exploding with laughter from nonsense like asking how big were his feet. About a man Sally had seen on the street, everything lilted or swooped with their joking. Baby talk always accompanied smoking. Weech for a wacky instead of a thweet. Eyes bugged and lips smacked. Oh, what a rare treat. His mother's delivery, so uniquely brusque, would during those visits, especially near dusk, ooze sultry and slower and wooze on the brink of the D to J journey where drink becomes drink. The change was only confined to their speech. Everything that came within Sally's reach seemed somehow transformed, and largely because of just her, like when the house landed in Oz. I'm going to have a drink because my mouth is very dry. How are you liking the book? Is it a bit weird? A bit too weird? I really love this book. Let me know whether you're enjoying it while I have a drink. Yum. I'm loving listening to you read me a story. Thank you, Jen. I'm really glad to hear that. Glad you're enjoying it. That's wonderful news. To quote Hunter S. Thompson, it never got weird enough for me. Perfect then. We will carry on. We've read, what's that, maybe a third of the book? Let's see. Yeah, David Rakoff passed away in 2012. Okay, so we've read 30 pages and there's 113. So a quarter of the way through, not a third. Raining here now, being blasted with wafts of petrichor, enjoying the reading. Is it a bunch of stories or one big story? It's a bunch of stories that are all related to each other, so it's lots of different characters that are related to each other. Did I not read you the back? Let me do it again, just in case. Love, dishonor, marry, die, cherish, perish, leaps cities and decades as Rakoff sings the song of an America whose freedoms can be intoxicating or brutal. The characters' lives are linked to one another by acts of generosity or cruelty. Rakoff's insistence on beauty and the necessity of kindness as a selfish world races the novel far above mere satire. A critic once called Rakoff magnificent, a word that perfectly describes this singular work. So it's an act that joins them to each other. You have a lovely reading voice. Thank you for saying that, she said, Lane. That's really kind of you. Thank you. Andy C says, feels like we're all sitting cross-legged on the carpet as teacher Flossie tells us a tale. That's really fucking sweet, Andy C. I'm so glad. That's a nice way to put it. Thank you. Prior and post, life could hardly be duller, but darling, the word buzzed in bright technicolor, an adverb of joy to his 6-year-old thinking. To do it, Aunt Sally, meant action plus drinking. Ice cream for breakfast and socks never matching, bark like a dog for a fierce tummy scratching. There was none of the darkness that can come with alcohol, just a delightful ignoring of protocol. As he grew older, he realized the frivolous nature hid goodness that bordered on chivalrous. Sally was truly the bestest of eggs. She'd spend hours massaging the chicken bone legs of Cliff's unresponsive but darting-eyed father. She'd keep up the chatter like it was no bother. There you are, Hiram, and handsome as ever, her kindness encased in a varnish of clever. She'd talcum his feet or bring in fresh flowers, read him a photo play for what seemed like hours. While always subjective, was now so unthinkable, flimsy, selective, in a thrall to the twists of his brain's involutions, the cranial mists and synaptic occlusions he'd had to contend with since he'd had a stroke, like trying to sculpt something solid from smoke. Everything now, liquid space, rubber time, tenuous grasps of both reason and rhyme, could now trap his words in a Mobius loop. He'd spend a whole day thinking elegant soup. Despite that, no broth was remotely forthcoming, and how could it be that his knees would be humming, or buzzing, bees' knees, bee sneeze, so confusing, hours might go by in such meaningless musing. Hiram was Herschel, of that he was certain, though other details are obscured by a curtain of knowledge he no longer knew if he knew. So Hiram was Herschel, and Herschel is you? Herschel came more than 3 decades before. A lead to some landsman outside Baltimore had failed to achieve a reliable connection, and so in the Forvress classified section from Bozeman, Montana, a dry god's concern, be ready to work and be willing to learn. And so, with no warning and no indication, the years of concerted expansion, deflation, images atomized, suddens, dispels, time barreled forward, looped back through reversals, and now, from some darkest recess of his brain, a vision long lost to the girl on the train. He'd come upon others while riding the trails, but no one that young, nor has haunted or frail, and hair, surely reddest hair he ever did see. He briefly thought there was a fire in the straw. Out there alone, barely 13 years old, such shaking, and not only due to the cold. She knew in some way that he meant her no harm, and silently slid herself into his arms to try to allay any feelings of skittishness. He rocked her to sleep with an old song in Yiddish. Raisins and almonds, a little white goat, she burrowed herself in the depths of his coat. Clifford is here now, his good gentle child. He'd love nothing more than to be able to smile, to look at the drawings Cliff spread across the bed, be anything but unresponsive, half dead. Perhaps the return of this strange red-head flower is simple nostalgia for when he had power. Let's let him sleep, Cliff. Sally turns out the light. Herschel stares forward at nothing all night. The only plant Sally's bright light failed to nourish was Helen, her daughter, too timid to flourish, and Sally's attempts were quite frankly misguided. Always a cut-up, she joshed and she chided, and went on and on at an uncomfortable length, thinking, in error, that Helen had strength to be able to laugh, or at least grasp the gist that the jests were the stars of wounds that did not exist. In regard, Helen was tone-deaf, fantastic. Untruth sounded real, not the least bit sarcastic. But tone-deafness shuttles in any direction. To Salad the japing was naught but affection. She had no idea that her joking felt flat, that calling her slender girl porky and fat, or just outright fictitious, like try not to limp, made Helen curl inward, a cowed sheepish shrimp. constantly braced for harsh words or cold looks, perpetually hunched as if carrying books with titles like Helen, the girl no one wanted. Cliff felt the bond of the outcast, the taunted. Where he had been strengthened almost to unbreakable by sketching his tormentors torments unspeakable, she was contrite, too polite, over dutiful, never aware that in truth she was beautiful. Taller, it's true, than a girl ought to be. Boys, when they looked, call her flagpole or tree, but Clifford could see with an eye almost clinical, yet open, affectionate, not at all cynical, the classic proportions informing her shape. It was all he could do not to grab her and drape her in bedsheets as a toga, and once he had made that he'd ringlet her hair with a daub of pomade. And Helen would let him, thought she, 2 years older, felt Clifford was wiser than she. He was bolder, with deeply held views on all manner of things. Mustard, no. Claude Monet, yes. Cabbages, kings. And when they were young, they'd begun each trip shyly, regarding the other suspiciously, slyly, until, not unlike the way both of their mothers resumed their old bond, quite impervious to others, by day 2 to see them, it would have seemed quibbling to call them just constant cousins. They acted like siblings, and though his allegiance was chief to his art, she felt he had only her interests at heart. She never felt his deep absorption, neglect, nor ever stopped feeling he was her protector. If Clifford proposed it, she'd echo with "me too" to things she'd have otherwise never agreed to do. Little whiskey snoring. To wit, behind privets and glinting like jewels lay largely unguarded cerulean pools, all maintained perfectly pristine as new, emptyingly empty, impossibly blue. The owners at country homes up in the mountains cared little, it seemed, for the frothing of fountains, nor for the colonnades, marble, mosaic. A rectangle would have been far too prosaic. The plaster Poseidons on Anthicus plinths, freezers aswirl with young mermaids and nymphs, all lay unnoticed, unloved, unenjoyed. How could they not but dive into the void? Daily, when either was seized by the whim, they'd slip through the hedges and go for a swim, make free with the towels in poolside cabanas, and eat from the trees mangoes, lequants, bananas. One time they both scrambled up into the trees and stayed well concealed till the old Japanese man who tended the grounds had passed by far out of sight. Helen had never felt such a thrilling fright. She'd all but stopped breathing so as not to arouse the gardener's gaze up into the green brows. The coast clear, she clambered to earth and then joined Clifford, his arms full of fruit he'd purloined. "Take these," he said, filling her arms with a loot that he'd pulled from the branches now laden with fruit. Clutching them all to her rubberized bodice, Clifford regarded her, whispering, "Goddess." The bright orange globes did their best to defeat her and fall from the grasp of their poolside demeanour. "Cliff, they're dropping, there must be a dozen," she started to say, but was stopped by her cousin with a quietly stern admonition. "Don't talk. I just need to compose you." His black brownie eye hawk, the charm like a murmurous watch on a chain. Helen fell silent and wondered again how Clifford could somehow just know how to take light and coax magic into a box of black bakelite. Moving her under an arch of white flowers, artist and muse worked together for hours. Dismissing some poses as striving for cute, Clifford said shortly, "Now roll down your suit." He gave her a couple of oranges here and showed her just how she should hold each sphere. His voice held no sneer nor a trace of a jest. She trusted him fully that bearing her chest would make the best pictures. She laughed when she saw the inside-out breasts of the cups of the bra. "Keep laughing," he said. Didn't need to ask twice. She felt so secure and the breeze felt so nice. They worked 30 minutes or so till the sun started to set, at which Clifford said, "Done." Back through the hedge into the house where they let Sally juice the breasts for crepe Suzette. Helen. A friend just tweeted at me that the rain had started in Bath, so it's spreading. That's fantastic news. 10 a.m. in December, Midtown Manhattan. Helen sits at her desk in a dress of blue satin, a pearl among swine, so at odds with the bustling of mid-morning business, her taffetas rustling. A vision of cocktails in coffee break light, she is garbed for the company party at night. It is too far a trek out to Avenue J, just to go home to change at the end of the day, so she sits doing work, ignoring the mounting whispers and jokes led by Kay in accounting. She's aware that her dress makes the other girls laugh as they congregate over the mimeograph. Helen gamely endures not the kindness of stares with aplomb, for you see, Helen no longer cares. Well, that's mostly the truth, though some doubts still impinge. Each year around Thanksgiving there's an unwelcome twinge, starts to niggle and rake, and by mid-December she wonders anew, do they all still remember? Helen turns a blind eye to the smirks and the winks. Surely it's not still about that, she thinks. Time's gone by since that silly, regrettable business when she became known as the girl who ruined Christmas. Helen harbours the hope that the passing 5 years have made folks forget both the vomit and tears and throwing of glassware and drunken alteration, that half-hour tirade of recrimination where, feeling misused, she had got pretty plastered and named his name publicly and called him a bastard. The details are fuzzy, though others have told her she insulted this one and cried on that shoulder, then lurched round the ballroom all pitching and weaving and ended the night in the ladies' lounge heaving. How had it begun before things all turned rotten? That can pinpoint the day she had never forgotten. How he came to her desk and leaned over her chair to look at some papers and then smelled her hair. Gardenias, he said with his voice sultry and lazy, and hot on her ear. Helen felt she'd gone crazily, a fragrance so heady it borders on sickly. He'd purred at her neck and then just as quickly was all back to business, demanding she call some client as if he'd said nothing at all. She was certainly never an expert at men, but an inkling and twinkling, especially when the next day he all but confirmed Helen's hunch when he leaned from his office and asked her to lunch. Their talk was all awkward and formal to start. He'd said that he'd found her efficient and smart. She thanked him, then stopped. She was quite at a loss. She'd never before really talked to her boss. They each had martinis, which helped things turn mellow. He asked where she lived, as if she had a fellow. He reached for her hand and asked, "Will you allow an old man to wonder who's kissing you now?" It was close to convenient, his spare Midtown rental, after more drinks at a bar near Grand Central, to sit once again in an uncomfortable silence like two guilty parties to some kind of violence. They skipped among the oblivion seekers while June crisply sang from the bar's tinny speakers. He settled the bill and they got to their feet and emerged from the afternoon rush to the street. They walked arm in arm in some crude imitation of others' real couples en route to the station, such leisurely strolling, although it's grown late against her best judgment, it feels like a date. His boozy cloud blown over, now happy, near beaming, he stops at a window of cutlery gleaming. He points out the wares, taking note of a set that he likes best of all, and he says, "We should get that." She knows as a joke, all this idle house playing, but briefly she hopes that he's meant what he's saying. Her presence, she thinks, is what's rendering him gladder, but really it's just what he aimed for and had her. The heinous reason behind his new glow is what Helen and many others don't just like her don't know is that men's moods turn light and their spirits expanded the moment they sense an escape is at hand. He patted her cheeks and he said, "I'm replenished," then off through the crowd for the next train to Greenwich. Helen pictured his house with his broad flagstone path, the windows lit up and the child's fresh from the bath, and wondered if she might just smell of his skin, the coppery scent of the afternoon sin. At her desk the next Monday, it was business as always. There were no words exchanged, not a glance in the hallways. With relief, Helen thought, well, that's that, never more, till Friday, again at his pied-à-terre door. And Friday thereafter, and each after that, for close to 2 years, till their actions begat such actions were won when the cautions ignored, and the cures of things she could scarcely afford. They talked in his office behind the closed door. She could tell from his face that he'd been there before. In the envelope left at the next day on her desk was 200 cash and a downtown address. She'd never had visions of roses or cupids from the beginning. She wasn't that stupid. But you don't hope for can't turn round to hurt you. Besides, she had long before given her virtue. There hadn't been untoward coaxing or urging. This wasn't the ogre defiling the virgin. He's older than she, but they both played the game of never once speaking the other one's name. Their mutual distance a plan jointly hatched to keep things unserious, flip and detached. It was, truth be told, when they coolly reflected, not all that much different from what she'd expected, she thought, and it sounded absurd. How long had it been since she'd uttered that word? Oh my goodness me, it's Shaman_Steve. Hello, Shaman_Steve. It's so nice to see you. This is Love, Dishonor, Marry, Die, Cherish, Perish is a novel by David Rakoff, and it's written in prose. So it's one full story. It's lovely. Did David Rakoff write a book of poems? Oh my, this is excellent. It's great, Shaman Steve. I'm kind of butchering it, but I'm having a good time. I'm really glad you're here, Shaman Steve, and I hope you're well. Mwah. That men's moods turn light and their spirits expand the moment they sense an escape is at hand. He patted her cheek and he said, I'm replenished, then off through the crowd to the next plane to Greenwich. Helen pictured his house with his broad flagstone path, the windows lit up, the child fresh from the bath. I've read that page already. What's happened to me? What's wrong with my book? Oh no. Here we go. And yet there were moments unbarred, undefended, when Helen concocted, cooked up, and pretended she had all the trappings that go with the life of the thoroughly satisfied, marified wife of a man who might keep her, despite the new battle that said wives were really no better than chattel, the difference too scant between bridal and bridal, and girls who had everything now suicidal, finally finding their voices to speak on their feminine fetters, this loathsome mystique. This problem at Thermore hadn't a name, and still Helen just couldn't resist the same, to wonder how much such a cared-for existence feel after the decades of hard-worn subsistence. A mistress of manner, so calm, so serene, to know that nowhere was any vitrine whose silvery wares would be ever denied her. She tempered such a radiant desire to keep inside her, and hoped if she kept the dream hidden and frozen, she soon would forget that she'd never been chosen. But dreams scream as loud whether thriving or dying, and Helen, despite herself, never stopped trying. With boxes of candy to New England camps, and weekly she cut and saved all foreign stamps. I thought that your son, and she'd leave it at that. He would pocket the packet while donning his hat, and give her a friendly yet courtesy nod, in thanks for the postage that came from abroad, with turrets and toucans or archdukes, an antelope carefully trimmed and then slipped in an envelope. She gave it her all, not to trawl for his gaze, and used thus those words, thus ensuring the phrase stayed tossed off, lest he find her maternal gesture too avid or larded with over-investure, a strategy subtler than some store-bought toy, the covert seduction of a man through his boy. And as for less hidden campaigning, that too reared its head only once with a "This is for you," when Helen presented a square of manila, the contents so personal she thought it might kill her. As if he suspected the ardour, he'd mock it, so she was relieved when it joined in the pocket of the stamps. Her relief was compounded still when he'd never brought up Helen's token again. The doctor's door must have 5 or more locks, with a 6th to secure Helen's cash in a box. He lowered the blinds to block out the sun. Helen felt guilty before they'd begun. Just a knife blade of rays now bisected the room, a useless diver twixt sorrow and gloom. Their first words, as though not already quite clear, were, "If anyone asks, you have never been here." Helen, to show where there would be no such slips, turned a key in her mouth, and she locked up her lips. She'd done it to combat the scent of despair that pervaded the shade funeral air, that she understood that could always be trusted. But he curled his lip and seemed almost disgusted, as if she was flirting or being beguiling. He muttered, "I thought that by now you'd stop smiling." She slackened her face, said, "I'm sorry," and hastened, undressing and feeling quite thoroughly chastened. She lay back and placed her feet in the cold stirrups and faced towards the window, all birdsong and chirrups. A gauzy pad moist with some drops to sedate her, a red rubber bulb, all plain kitchen grater. He used on what looked like a brick of pink soap. The colour was drawn the exact shade of hope. Waxy rose strands fell down into the water to flush out a son or incipient daughter. Woozy now, Helen regarded the basin and angled herself so she might put her face in, and leaned near the surface and took in a breath of almonds and ether, of freedom and death. To help with the nausea, he gave her some pills. Though woefully few, she felt green at the gills. The trip back to Brooklyn, she stood on the train. She'd seriously thought she'd pass out from the pain. There were stories of girls all summerly slacked who found out they no longer had jobs to come back to. At least she had that, but she started to feel that it hardly seemed worth it to work for a heel. For each passing day found her feeling less grateful, primarily 'cause he was hurtful and hateful. Some mimical kindness was not all tall order. Instead, he was rude, or he outright ignored her, until she decided that this wasn't right and stood in the door of his office one night. She asked if he'd ever again say hello, fedoras and coated and ready to go. He took a step backward as if sensing danger and fixed her with the eyes of a cold-blooded stranger. "I don't know what your name is, and frankly I don't care, but don't threaten me, Helen. I warn you, beware." The very next Monday from others she heard that without her knowledge he's had her transferred. At least tiny comfort they didn't demote her, but Helen became what is known as a floater, doing sterno for this one or helping with filing, and although it all Helen made sure to keep smiling. The salt in the wound was the sight that then faced her, those looks he exchanged with the girl who'd replaced her. She'd made herself steely as ever the stoic. She held back her tears with an effort heroic, but sometimes something was growing with each passing day, till it burst forth the night of her shameful display. She'd figured they'd fire her within the new year, but Helen soon realized she'd had nothing to fear. What she wasn't to know was the company's bosses viewed Helen as one of those typical crosses. A company's role it is sadly to bear, a lazy one here or a crazy one there, and so no one made any move to relieve her, and mostly because they just didn't believe her. Perhaps there are those who consider it shameful that Helen comes yearly all dressed up and gameful. Just showing herself in the very same setting cannot help to ensure folks forgetting. But she won't stay home or remain out of sight. To do so, she thinks, would just prove that they're right. She might have been drunk and far too forward, uncouth, but each word that she'd spoken had been the truth. Miss 1 or 2 parties, and then before long the general consensus would be she was wrong, a version to which she refused to be pliant. So each year she stands there alone and defiant, while others quaff cocktails and gradually lose the strictness and slowly dissolve with the booze. There's tippling and cooping, embracing and brio, and all being scored by the hired jazz trio. Helen just stands there observing all night, sips her gimlet against the far wall. Evening progresses, the room now quite loud, and here's Kay from accounting. She weaves through the crowd. A man on her left arm, a drink in her right. "All alone are we, Helen? No fellow tonight?" Kay wears her face an expression of utter concern, like her mouth couldn't even melt butter. And here is the truth Helen's long had resisted. In most of their eyes, she just barely existed, except as a source of some acid-tinged mirth, a punchline, it seems, for the source of her worth. They don't think of that time. Indeed, they don't care. She had always to them barely even been there. The time when this might have been painful is past. Nothing hurts Helen now. Her heart has been cast in bronze or in iron, or chiselled from lime or some other substance as adamantine. Her biggest regret is 5 years wasted. Her biggest regret is 5 wasted years that she chided herself over shedding those tears. Instead of those wishing for eyes that stayed dry, she could cherish that Helen so able to cry. That Helen who felt things, that then wasn't scared to air them in public. That Helen who cared enough about things, who could speak them aloud. That Helen of whom she might ever be proud. Taking both of Kay's hands with no rancor, no bile, Helen looks in her eyes and breaks into a smile. "You're right," Helen says. "I should call it a day." Helen smiles all my time and then adds, "Fuck off, Kay." Helen takes off her dress and gets ready for bed. There is a peace deep within her, where once only dread. In the comforting nocturnal gloom, an image took form in the air of her room. Was it really as distant as 16 long years since Clifford had handed her 2 golden spheres he plucked from a fruit-laden tangerine tree, and holding his camera had said, "Look at me"? He posed her half naked like some Aphrodite. Helen felt marvellous, brilliant and mighty. The pictures he'd taken was her at her best, the oranges, each one to cover a breast. She'd never felt better than she did that day. And rude that she'd given the picture away. She shook her head, pained, for this hardly distinguished itself from the many gifts she had relinquished. She watches the window for most of the night, turned from deep black as it gathers up light, and as the plains bloom to a beautiful blue, she lights on a theory, although it feels true. Babylonian, Aztec, Gregorian, or Julian, all calendars must know those hours where cerulean skies seem so pure and to go on forever, that one feels each dream and one's every endeavour's success is as sure as the coming of dawn. She gulped in the air with a satisfied yawn. A calm had descended around 5 a.m., which made her immune to the power of them. Gets up, quite refreshed, sets the coffee to perk. For once looking forward to going to work, she pours out a cup, adds a stream of cold milk, and smiles as it swirls just like taffeta silk. And we're halfway through the book now, so I'm going to put my bookmark in, and we can finish next week. We're 15 minutes short of a 2-hour stream, but maybe we can just chat for a bit, or we can just all leave. I think half of a book a stream is pretty good, and it's a good book. Hey, it's really nice. I'm sorry I keep missing words, but it's surprisingly difficult to read out loud. Hopefully I get better at it with practice. But, Shaman Steve, have you read David Rakoff's other books? I've also got Half Empty, and I have another of his, Fraud. Have you read either of those, Shaman Steve? Oh, she said, Lane, thank you so much. Thank you so much for cheering. You're very, very generous to me. It's really kind of you. Thank you, she said, Lane. You're very generous. Really, really kind of you. Especially since I interrupted your wank. So thank you for coming to hang out. Hey, I didn't want to interrupt when I came in. Are you well? Hello, Claire, my love. Hello to darling Claire only. It's so nice to see you. Glad that you're here. No, I just heard a few of his pieces from This American Life. That's how I found him as well. He's got great books. I'll work through them here, and then you can decide if you want to buy any of them. But he's great. I really like his work. I'm pretty sure that he did an audiobook for Love, Dishonor, Marry, Die. I think it was when he was quite ill, just before he passed away, and you can hear him sort of like deteriorate throughout the recording, and it's devastating but gorgeous. David Rakoff wrote the bestsellers Fraud, Don't Get Too Comfortable, and Half Empty, a 2-time recipient of the Lambert Literary Award and a winner of the Thurber Prize for American Humor. He was a regular contributor to Public Radio's International's This American Life. His writings frequently appear in the New York Times, Newsweek, Wired, Salon, GQ, Outside, Gourmet, Vogue, and Slate, among other publications. An accomplished stage and screen actor, playwright, and screenwriter, he adapted the screenplay for and starred in Joachim Bach's film The New Tenants, which won the 2010 Oscar for Best Short Film. Live action. He died in